May 20th, 1989, 3 a.m., Soviet airbase, Georgian SSR. Every guard on duty is asleep. The pilots in the barracks are asleep. The duty officer is asleep. 37 men, unconscious, put there by a homemade cake their comrade baked 12 hours ago, and watch them eat, piece by piece, while smiling. Now that comrade is walking to the hangar alone in the dark, flight suit on, hands steady, heart hammering. In 15 minutes, he will steal the most advanced fighter jet in the Soviet Union. In 40 minutes, Soviet interceptors will be shooting at him over the Black Sea. In 90 minutes, he will land in NATO territory, with blood flooding the cockpit and one arm that barely functions. How does one man drug an entire Soviet airbase and disappear with their most classified weapon? Alexander Zuyev was born in 1961 in Samara. His father taught science. His mother raised him in a country where information was rationed the same way food was. No foreign press, no independent sources, no version of the world that hadn't been pre-approved by the party before it reached you. He grew up believing in the Soviet system, the way most children there did, not from stupidity, simply because nothing else was available to believe in. He was gifted. His flight school scores ranked near the top of his class. When he first sat inside a MiG-29, he felt something close to awe. Twin engines, supersonic capable, able to climb to 18,000 meters and outturn most of what the West could put against it. For a young pilot from Samara, it was the most powerful thing he had ever touched. But the system that built the MiG-29 was rotting from the inside. He watched senior officers advance on political loyalty rather than skill. He watched talented men stagnate while party-connected mediocrities rose above them. He flew the Soviet Union's most classified fighter every morning, and every morning understood more clearly that the machine existed to protect something he no longer believed in. The final break came in April 1989. In Tbilisi, miles from where Zuyev was stationed, Soviet troops used sharpened military shovels to disperse Georgian civilians, demonstrating for independence. 20 died. Hundreds were wounded. The official press called it a provocation by anti-Soviet agitators. Zuyev had seen the aftermath himself. After Tbilisi, something in him stopped pretending entirely. He had already made contact with a CIA officer months before, during what appeared to be an accidental encounter in Moscow. Over nearly 2 years of careful, fragmented communication, a plan developed. The Americans verified his identity slowly, certain at first that a Soviet pilot offering to steal the USSR's most advanced fighter was a KGB provocation. When they concluded he was genuine, the operation became methodical. Flight paths across the Black Sea, radar gap windows, a landing arrangement in Trabzon, Turkey, every contingency mapped. The one problem without a clean solution was the base itself. Getting from the barracks to the hangar without encountering someone who would raise an alarm required that there simply be no one awake. The solution was a cake, a sedative compound with no taste and no smell, calibrated precisely enough that the effect could be timed by body weight. He baked it himself. He tested portions of the compound on himself beforehand to confirm the dosage. On the evening of May 19th, he brought the cake to the barracks. Homemade food was rare enough in Soviet military life that a decorated cake was a genuine occasion. Zuyev distributed pieces to each man in turn, laughed at their jokes, told one of them a story about a letter from his mother. Nothing to think twice about. The last to fall asleep was Senior Lieutenant Petro, an experienced officer who had caught something slightly wrong in Zuyev's manner that evening. When Petro finally went down, Zuyev sat among unconscious men and allowed himself 5 seconds of stillness. Then he stood up, dressed in his flight suit, and walked out into the dark, alone. He had roughly 2 hours before the drug wore off. He had left his wife behind in the USSR. He had left everything behind. The base at night looked exactly like a military base should. Perimeter lighting, concrete paths between low buildings, the dark shapes of aircraft shelters in the distance. Zuyev walked at a deliberate pace, not too fast, not too slow. Running would flag him if anyone was watching from a window. At the hangar entrance, a young sergeant stood on duty. As Zuyev approached, he could see the man's head drooping against his rifle, asleep on his feet. Zuyev walked past him without slowing. Inside, the MiG-29 waited. He had flown this specific airframe for 3 years. He knew its fuel consumption profile at every altitude, the pressure tolerances in each hydraulic line. He ran the pre-flight check with the precision of a man who understood that one misstep would kill him as efficiently as any interceptor. He paid particular attention to the ejection seat. If Soviet fighters caught him over the Black Sea, it was the only thing standing between him and the water at 18,000 meters or 50 feet above the waves. A shootout occurred at the base before he got airborne. Zuyev had a pistol, later recovered from the cockpit by Turkish authorities. He was hit. A gunshot wound to the right arm, confirmed that morning by the director of Trabzon University Hospital. He reached his aircraft wounded, blood already on his flight suit, and started the engines anyway. The MiG-29's twin turbofans ignited with a sound that crossed the entire base. Some soldiers stirred. A night training sortie, it happened occasionally. Nobody moved to investigate. Zuyev taxied without clearance, aligned with the runway without radio contact, and pushed the throttle forward. The aircraft lifted off the Georgian ground into the dark sky above the Caucasus. He turned west toward the Black Sea. He had approximately 15 minutes before the base fully processed what had happened. The duty air defense officer received the alert moments later. Unauthorized MiG-29 departure. Pilot unresponsive. Heading west. Fighters scrambled for multiple bases. The orders to intercept pilots were unambiguous. Force the aircraft to return. If it refuses, destroy it. There was no third option authorized. He flew 50 feet above the Black Sea surface, close enough that the wave tops blurred beneath him in the dark. At that altitude, the MiG-29's radar return merged with sea clutter below, making a clean tracking solution from pursuing aircraft significantly harder. 2 MiG-23 interceptors appeared on his radar approximately 20 minutes after takeoff, vectored from a coastal patrol position and closing fast. Soviet military accounts stated that the pursuing pilots had received unambiguous orders: force the aircraft to return or destroy it. Zuyev had expected pursuit. The speed of their arrival told him the scramble order had gone out faster than his calculations had assumed. The MiG-29 held genuine performance advantages over the older airframe in energy management and turn rate at low altitude. He knew this from years of training exercises against it. He used everything the aircraft had, pulling hard direction changes and forcing the interceptors to bleed energy trying to match him, keeping low enough that radar-guided missile solutions remained degraded against the sea below. Then the firing started. The first burst passed behind his aircraft. The second was more accurate. The aircraft was struck. Left wing damage documented by Turkish officials. Bullet holes confirmed when Soviet technicians later arrived to reclaim the airframe. Shrapnel caught Zuyev in the arm. Blood began entering the cockpit. The hydraulic system started degrading. Controls became heavier and less precise. The MiG-29 was still flying, still responding, but the accuracy was leaving it system by system. Zuyev was managing a damaged aircraft with a damaged arm, losing blood at a rate he could feel but not measure. The Turkish coast was a fixed distance, and distance disappears if you keep moving. The coastline appeared on the horizon. Behind him, the interceptors broke off. Crossing into NATO airspace without Moscow's authorization would have triggered a diplomatic incident their commanders had not been cleared to create. Zuyev crossed the invisible line over the Black Sea. He aimed for Trabzon and began his approach. The Trabzon control tower tracked the unidentified contact coming in fast from the east and instructed it to turn back. He kept descending. The aircraft touched the concrete at 5:10, traveled nearly the full length of the runway at a speed that alarmed the controllers watching from the tower, and stopped within meters of the end. Turkish military and security personnel surrounded the aircraft within minutes. Zuyev opened the canopy. blood-soaked flight suit, wounded arm, cockpit marked by everything that had happened over the water. A pistol was recovered from the cockpit. The aircraft still had part of its canvas hangar cover hanging from the fuselage. No time to remove it before takeoff. Left-wing damage was visible. Multiple bullet holes were documented by Turkish officials. His first words to Turkish personnel, spoken in broken English, were "Take me to hospital." The Soviet Foreign Ministry demanded the return of both the aircraft and the pilot within hours of landing. Turkey initially refused to allow the Soviet recovery team to land, citing unsafe conditions at an unlit airport after dusk, creating, by design or coincidence, an overnight window during which the MiG-29 sat largely undisturbed on Turkish soil. The United States made a direct formal request to inspect the aircraft. Turkey refused completely. The opportunity, what later accounts described as the most significant intelligence prize to land in NATO's lap in decades, was sitting on a runway in Trabzon, and the alliance partner in possession of it was declining to share it. Within 36 hours, Turkey returned the MiG-29 to the Soviet Union. Soviet technicians arrived, dismantled the aircraft's weapon systems, loaded them separately, and the fighter was escorted back into Soviet airspace. President George H.W. Bush personally met with Turkish Prime Minister Turgut Özal at a NATO summit to address the fallout. The man who had bled across the Black Sea to hand NATO the Soviet Union's most classified fighter had delivered it to an ally who handed it straight back to Moscow before Western engineers could examine a single rivet. Zuyev was transferred to American officials on June 11, 1989, and left Turkish soil aboard a U.S. military aircraft. He was 27 years old. In the United States, he cooperated with defense and intelligence personnel, providing everything he knew about MiG-29 operations, Soviet pilot training methodology, and the tactical doctrines the aircraft had been built around. It was valuable information, even if it was not the aircraft itself. In 1992, he published his memoir, Fulcrum, a Top Gun pilot's escape from the Soviet Empire, the first detailed account of life as a Soviet frontline fighter pilot written from the inside. It was widely read in both the United States and Europe. He had defected alone. His wife remained in the USSR when he left. The details of what Soviet authorities did to his family after his MiG-29 disappeared from Georgian radar. In 1992, a second child was born in the United States. Zuyev surrendered parental rights almost immediately. He flew, he consulted, he moved. On June 10, 2001, Alexander Zuyev took off in a Yak-52 light aircraft near Custer, Washington. The engine failed in flight. He attempted an emergency landing on a highway. The aircraft struck a car. Zuyev died at the scene. He was 39 years old. The car's occupants survived. He had survived Soviet interceptors, firing live cannon rounds at him over the Black Sea. He had landed a hydraulically degraded MiG-29 with one working arm and blood pooling in the cockpit. He had crossed the most fortified airspace in the Cold War world using a homemade cake. 2 years of planning, and whatever reserves of nerve a man accumulates in the months before the thing he has been building toward finally arrives. 12 years after all of that, he died on a highway outside Seattle in a light aircraft alone. The MiG-29 was never publicly displayed in the West. No museum claimed it. Turkey returned it to the people he had stolen it from, and that was the end of it. There was no clean ending, just a pilot who wanted to be free, who paid for it in ways that outlasted the escape itself. Far from the Black Sea, far from the cake, far from the hangar, and far from everything that happened on the night he walked out into the dark and didn't look back.